It is my great pleasure to now move to introduce our keynote speaker. And I have to say that the program organizers gave me a pretty tough job because I could spend a half hour introducing our keynote speaker, but I'll try to just hit the highlights. The program notes describe our keynote speaker as the co-director of the Los Jardines Institute at Albuquerque and the national co-coordinator of the Environmental Justice and Health Alliance for Chemical Policy Reform, and also as the co-chair of the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. And that particular last group is kind of a who's list of the leaders in environmental justice across the country. But these are just the latest chapters in this man's amazing history as a founding father of the national environmental justice movement. Now, I had the pleasure of first meeting Richard in the early 1990s when I was a new and inexperienced director of the Air Division in EPA Region 6. I don't know if, Richard, you remember that or not, but I sure do. And he was at that time the executive director of the Southwest Network for Environmental and Economic Justice in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And by the time I met our speaker, he had already been involved for about a dozen years with Southwest Organizing Project. He'd been a founding member of the Black Berets in Albuquerque and helped create the Bobby Garcia Memorial Clinic, a cultural school, free breakfast programs, a dental clinic, and other co-ops, which was kind of enough for a career all by itself. But he'd also been involved, as if that wasn't enough, on the national stage by helping to organize the first National People of Color Environmental Summit in Washington, D.C. in 1991, an event that is now recognized as a seminal event in the development of the environmental justice movement and produced the principles of environmental justice that define the movement even today. In an interview in 1994, Richard said, quote, "I think that when we came to Washington with that many people, they stated, 'You won't last 3 weeks.' And he said at that time, it's been 3 years now, and the hope is we'll be here in another 2 or 3 years to do the same thing we did today." That was in 1994. And now it's 2022, and Richard has never stopped. He's chaired EPA's National Environmental Justice Advisory Committee, a task which only those who've ever been involved with NEJAC can appreciate just how interesting that is. He also created a 570-acre urban wildlife refuge in Albuquerque and worked with countless communities dealing with contaminated sites, and he's just generally been everywhere. And in the process, he received so many awards, and it's a long list. I won't go through all of them, but it includes the Keep the Dream Alive Award, a Ford Foundation Leadership for a Changing World Fellowship, Human Rights Award from the City of Albuquerque, the Alston Bannerman Fellowship for Community Organizers of Color, the Luminaria Award of the New Mexico Community Foundation, the 2015 Cesar Chavez Si Se Puede Award from the Recuerda, the Environmental Health Hero Award from Healthcare Without Harm, and a number of others that I have left out. And in 2015, he was inducted into the Civil Rights Hall of Fame of Resistance in Selma, Alabama. So, we are fortunate to have here with us today a man who was not only present at the creation, but who has kept leading and creating new partnerships for a new generation. But my final story is personal. In the early 1990s, Richard was involved in fighting a gasoline storage tank farm in East Austin, Texas. And he won that fight, which was a victory for the whole community. So where do my daughter and my 2 grandchildren live now? You guessed it, East Austin. So it is with humility and gratitude that I present to you a true champion of the people, Richard Moore. Thank you very much.
You know, I really appreciate that. You know, that picture kind of scared me a little bit because I didn't recognize who that was for a minute there. That's kind of a scary guy. With y'all's permission, I'm going to put my hat on because the picture reminded me that at home, they said that if you, and my mother, my grandparents said that if you wear a hat, it helps to keep the body warm. And so, with your permission, I'm going to put the hat on to help keep my body warm. I just want to take a minute, if I can, just take a minute of silence very quickly. I'm very aware of the time today, but I have to give or get permission from our ancestors to be able to be on this land today and to be able to speak with you today. So if we could just bear for a second or two, and also think about all the sisters and brothers, our family members, for all the folks that in terms of some of the earlier presentations and the slides that we've seen, and those that have given up their lives to make it possible to be on this land today, but those that have passed that make it possible for us to be able to be in this room together today. So with your permission, if we could just take a moment of silence, please. All right, so I wanted to begin by just, again, as I say, to thank those and to appreciate the work of those that many times in our lives that our people or people don't think about. So I want to give presence to the food that we're having this morning, the food that has been shared with me and with us since I've been here in North Carolina over the last couple of days. And those are the farm workers that have picked the produce, the lettuce, the spinach, much of the fruit that's on the table. And you all know better than me as a visitor that the farm worker population here in the state has grown throughout the last many, many years. So we want to give presence to our sisters and brothers that made that food possible for us to receive in our body. Again, thank you very much to the workers of the college here, those that clean the rooms, those that have provided the food, those workers that in many cases, as we go through our work on a day-to-day basis, that we forget the people, again, that really make it possible for us to be here. And I can truly wanted to thank Clean Air North Carolina. June, I think I got it right the third time. And I say that because I think there was a minor adjustment of a name there, and I wanted to make sure that it was living up to my responsibility, or our responsibility, to give credit to the credit that's due, to make it not only possible for us to be here today, but to make it possible for me to be in your presence today. So now I'm gonna keep. I do have some notes down there. I'm gonna try to crunch it a little bit, okay? And so I'm not going to refer to the notes, but I just want to for a second, if we can, just go back for a minute. And we heard our sisters and brothers talk about some of the issues here in North Carolina. And so the best people to be able to speak about those issues, those frontline community representatives that have been engaged in these issues for many, many years. But I just want to, just for a second, if I can, just take us back for a moment. And one of that taking us back, we need to remember what took place in Warren County, and where I come from, where we come from, the work, our rural communities, our urban cities, and we need to remember the history of Warren County and that demonstration that took place in Warren County. And Sherry was reminding me that there's going to be a celebration and an activity in Warren County maybe in September. We or I do not come into a community without asking permission, not only from our ancestors, but for those grassroots individuals that have been engaged in this struggle for many, many years. So we will never forget the history of what took place in Warren County. And although I've come to visit from New Mexico, Warren County means as much to you all and those communities and those communities and representatives that have spoke, as it means to us all, not only in this country, but in this world, Because without history, sisters and brothers, without the history of systemic racism, environmental racism, as we've said over and over and again, systemic racism is the issue, environmental and economic justice is the goal. All we've ever asked for is just a little bit of justice, just a little bit of protection, just a little bit of understanding that when we look at the cumulative impact that you've heard this morning, whether it's the contamination or poisoning of our water, of our air, or our land, that when we look at those cumulative impacts and what our people have been faced with historically for over 500 years, we cannot just talk about what took place last year, the day before, last week, last month. We have to be able to historically look back at the injustice and the systemic racism, the intentional targeting of communities of color, whether they're urban communities, whether they're rural communities, whether our sisters and brothers in the fields that are being exposed to pesticides, and you go on, and you go on, and we go on, and we go on with those issues. Now I get a little excited, so bear with me, because one of the things that was very clear to me is that I looked back over the last couple of weeks because we, like you, we start off on a Monday, and then we usually end up on Sunday. Some start off on Monday, and they end up on Friday. But for us, we live the life, we live those realities, and so as we wake up every morning, every single morning of the day, then we have to look at not only the challenges that our communities are being impacted by, but the hundreds upon hundreds of solutions that our people have brought for generations upon generations. And so when we think about our people, when we think about Latinos, when we think about Native Americans, when we think about Asian Pacific Islanders, when we think about those sisters and brothers in African American communities, when we think about those low-income communities, when we think about our sisters and brothers in Appalachia, in many cases that suffer by the same impacts that many of us as people of color and the Native Indigenous people suffer throughout this country. So I say that to you because we have been historically about at the first People of Color Leadership Summit. For those of you that don't know, there's thousands upon thousands of grassroots environmental and economic justice organizations based in communities throughout this country. Not just hundreds, but thousands all over this country. And so understanding that then and just looking at some of the benchmarks of going through that history, then as we go through that moment of history and then flag the first National People of Color Leadership Summit that took place in 1991 in Washington, D.C., where it was said that we redefined environmentalism and conservationism. Sisters and brothers, do you hear me? Do you hear me? Do you hear me? We redefined environmentalism and conservationism as where we live, where we work, where we play, where we pray, and where we go to school and where we learn. We redefined and opened up the box of environmentalism and conservationism. You cannot discuss environmental justice without discussing economic justice. You cannot discuss health issues without looking at the health issues that many of our workers are impacted by and many of the work sites throughout this country and throughout North Carolina. And yes, sisters and brothers, sallowing out climate change and global warming is not a place, as our ancestors and our elders reminded us consistently, that climate change and global warming is an environmental and economic justice issue. You know, sometimes, and I've been to Washington and other places, and they say, Richard, we're not here today to discuss environmental justice. We're here to discuss climate justice. I said, I don't know what world you live in, but I do know the world that we live in. We don't live in a pretend world. We live in a real world. And based upon that, climate and global warming has been impacting our communities, this country, and the world for hundreds upon hundreds of years. So don't sallow us out and think that they're separate issues and say we're not here to discuss health care today, we're here to discuss environmental justice, or we're not here to, you saw some of the results of many and heard some of the many results of what's taking place there. So I say to you that it's not my first time, nor will it be my last time to be in the beautiful state of North Carolina, present amongst our sisters and brothers, our young people, our students, We've been about historically, and our ancestors and our elders remind us about building an intergenerational movement. An intergenerational movement, not because it was discussed at a university or if it was discussed at an institution or whatever, the need to do that, is because that's what our elders have reminded us consistently. We cannot engage in this discussion without participation of our children, without participation of our youth, without participation of our young adults, without the participation of our adults, and without the historical context that our elders bring to the discussion and the engagements that we're a part of. So now I don't want to get overly excited, but I do want to tell you something. You know, I had to think very seriously about coming to North Carolina. Not because of North Carolina, and I just want to tell you where I was at over the last week or so. No? We're farmers. I do co-coordinate an organization with Sofia Martinez, who's the other co-coordinator of Los Adines Institute. We work on agriculture. We're farmers. Our young people are farming while in this room today. We formed a farmers cooperative. It's made up of over 37 farms, particularly in the South Valley of Albuquerque. We work on the intersections of environmental and economic justice and the climate crisis that additionally has brought about environmental and economic injustice. And so over the weekend, as I remind myself, over the weekend, I was in Tularosa, New Mexico, with our youth. I'm not too sure of how many of you have been to Tularosa, New Mexico, or been to New Mexico. You know, in 1945, at the Trinity site, are we familiar with the Manhattan Project and Trinity and 1945, the explosion of the atomic bomb? And do you know, like many other legacy environmental justice issues, that in that rural community of Tularosa, there was real people living there. Farmers that can no longer, in many cases, farm anymore. Do you also know that because of the anniversary, we'll call it, of the Trinity site, thousands upon thousands of people traveled from all over the world to come to the Trinity site. And we were there. Yes, we were protesting in a peaceful way, passing out literature, reminding people that since 1945, our folks around those rural communities, and since we're all downwinders in urban cities like Albuquerque, in states like Texas, Utah, and several other states that were highly impacted by the radiation, are facing 3 generations of cancer. We met with the elders as we were present there, with the youth. And so we call on, how can we talk about some of these things that we're talking about by separating out rural communities and the impact of what's taking place? Cancers, asthma, we can go on with a long, long list of things. And so now we were there again calling on the U.S. government to do what it should have done in 1945. You know, our people in that village, in those communities, are not receiving the proper health care that they should and that they need to receive. Now, I don't want to get too overly excited, because I do. And my doctor reminded me before I left New Mexico, Richard, watch out for your blood pressure. You know, because at the end of the day, I get very excited when I hear our sisters and brothers talk about the issues. Yesterday, as we toured with our brother and with some of the other folk that took us on a tour, or took me on a tour, us on a tour yesterday, you know, it reminded me of my home. Redlining, all the issues that we're talking about, on and on and on. It reminded me of my home. It reminded me of 3 weeks ago when we were in the Mission District in San Francisco, touring some of the communities that surround, and including the Mission District. I've had the luxury to be able to travel not only to North Carolina, but to travel all over the country and the world. And so we cannot separate the realities the realities that we live on a day-to-day basis, we cannot separate those realities because for whatever is taking place in our community and some of those same corporations that are poisoning our people are poisoning other people throughout the world. The separation from the international, from the global to the local, to the regional, to the state, cannot be separated. And so I don't want to go on because I will get excited, but I just want to make, and I was saying to the students, and I really wanted to thank the students and thank the staff and all of those that have made it possible for my trip. I've been very well taken care of since I've been and arrived in North Carolina. So, but I want to just close on a couple of particular points. One, when it comes to solutions, many times as community people we're told, here come those complainers again. They've never come with solutions. I'm going to tell you something, ladies and gentlemen and sisters and brothers. If we haven't and our people have not come with solutions, we would not be in this room talking about it today. Do we know who invented different things and from African-American perspective that were just barely because it's African-American month? Can we get beyond just celebrating our history and our cultures around a month? Oh, in the Hispanic community, in the Latino community. It's Hispanic month. So now all of a sudden we see on TV things that we don't see very often throughout that period of time because it's a month. It's Asian Pacific Islander month. It's African American month. I mean, you go on and on and on. So when it comes to solutions, our people have brought forth many solutions, and I will guarantee you our young people and others will continue to come forward with solutions. The other thing I say is that nothing that I've done, and thank you very much for the reading of that history, nothing I've done in my life has been done by Richard Moore. Everything that we have been a part of our goal is to eliminate the I and work on the we. What have we done? We founded the first community-based health clinic in the city of Albuquerque. We opened up the first breakfast program in the city and the state of New Mexico. With donations from our community, whether it be tortillas, whether it be beans, whatever it may be. And we have made it possible, to be in this room, and you included, to be engaging in these discussions today. So lastly, I do want to say this, and our people, our youth at home particularly, say, you know, Richard says 3 times when he says it, and lastly, I would like to say. But what I want to do is be respectful to you all and be respectful to the time. So, yes, we have had success throughout these years. Now, it was said that I co-chair the White House Council on Environmental Justice. I don't know if you've been on one of those Zooms, but there's a lot of things flying in those Zooms. But I will tell you is that we have not had the opportunity, the 26 members of the WEJAC Council, to have a face-to-face meeting since the appointment has taken place. And you all know the reason for that, the pandemic. You know, I talked to my partner, I talked to my wife last night, called home to check in, and I took a deep breath because she said, I have to share something with you. And I got nervous, very, very nervous, because what I would tell you is that we have lost 54 people since the virus of 2 years ago and today. 54 people, okay? Some have been related to virus. Some has been heart attacks and strokes. Some have been suicides. And some of them have been accidents. So we truly know the reality of the lives that we live. The White House Council, which I will not speak for, you all know, is that it's a federal advisory committee. And out of transparency, I can only speak to issues. I cannot speak for or in behalf of the White House Council. The White House Council was not given to anyone out of the kindness of anyone's heart. Struggle, hundreds of years of struggle to get to where we are. And we asked this administration, previous to the election, that if you want to highlight issues of environmental and economic justice, then we all have got work to do, and we got it to do together. My mother consistently reminded me that as letters, historical letters were written to green groups, to allies, to institutions and others, that son, many things do not take place overnight. I had a discussion with my mother. My mother passed away several years ago, and I said, Mom, I just didn't expect it to be 30 years or 50 years or 100 years or 300 years, but we're living in the reality that we are. Now, I am going to close it. The White House Council has done incredible work, and we have to give credit where credit's due. I have to give credit for where credit is due. The Biden-Harris administration has very clearly, upon agreements that were made, lifted up to a higher level the question of not only environmental and economic justice, but the question of environmental racism. We still got a lot of work to do, and we're going to do it together. We can only do it together. So I just wanted to say and compliment our sisters and brothers from grassroots communities for the incredible longevity. Did I pronounce that word right? Because you know sometimes we make up our own words. And even our youth say sometimes, if we're doing press conferences or we're looking at something on TV, they kind of laugh amongst each other and said, that's not a real word, that was just made up. But if it was just made up, we all understood it. So it's the reality, no? So again, June, thank you to Clean Air North Carolina. I'm looking to come back to North Carolina by invitation. Hope we receive the invitation on the celebration for Warren County in September of this year. Ladies and gentlemen, sisters and brothers, we can only do it together. Isn't it really about making our communities? Isn't it really about making our cities, our states, our country, and this world a better place for all of us to live, work, play, pray, and go to school? So I leave you with this, that can only be done together. It can only be done through institutions like the institution that we're in today and some of the institutions that I've had the opportunity and we've had the opportunity to visit. We can only do it when county government, when city government, when state government, and when federal government gets beyond and takes us off the bean system. I'm not going to go into the bean system because those that are here from the EPA know what I'm talking about. How many people, both workers and communities, have to die until the sense of urgency of the climate crisis and the conditions that our people have been living under for generations upon generations? We can do it, we can do it, we can do it. But what I will say lastly, that's the third one and it is the last one. What I will say lastly, that after the first People of Color Leadership Summit in Washington, D.C., we received an internal memo. And now we say many a times, if industry is going to do an internal memo, get it to us somewhere along the line because we're going to get it. If the government is going to do internal memos, not to be shared by many of us, send it to us because we're going to get it. So, with that said then, there was an internal memo that we received. Don't know how, who sent it, but we got it. There was an internal memo after 1991 that said if environmental justice movement becomes the highlight and the coming together of the civil rights movement and the environmental justice movement, which is a part of the same, that this would be one of the most dangerous movements in the history of this country. And in that internal document, it also laid out goals, objectives, tactics, strategies, how much money is it going to cost, and who's going to be responsible. Now, that's an historical document for us in the environmental and economic justice movement. And so then we began to see some things happening back then. Articles come out in the New York Times discounting United Church of Christ report, the zip code system that was used. We've seen different articles. So I just want to say to you that the history that we're all a part of, whether it's academics, community-based academics, whether it's scientists, whether it's doctors, whether it's green groups, whether it's churches, whatever it is. Sisters and brothers, we can only do it together. I think we're here to do it together, and so let's do it together, and let's continue this day in the spirit and inspiration of who makes it possible for us to be in this room today. Thank you very much again, and really appreciate the opportunity, the presence, and the sincerity as human beings that I've been able to meet since I've been here. Thank you, sisters and brothers.